I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein, and welcome to American Architecture Now. We are extremely fortunate this evening to have with us one of the country's most renowned architects, winner of the American Institute of Architects' highest award, the 1979 Gold Medal. I.M. Pei & Partners have a large practice based in New York that has always sought to merge aesthetic concerns with commercial ones, and has ended up being ranked both with serious high design offices and with commercial ones. Mr. Pei was born in China, came to the United States 45 years ago to study, and has been here ever since. Among the many recent outstanding buildings he has designed, for which he has achieved considerable popular and critical acclaim, are the JFK Library Complex in Boston, in Dorchester, and the East Wing, the East Building of the National Gallery in Washington. To those of us addicted to architecture, it is a very special pleasure to welcome an architect who has achieved not only distinction, but fame. A warm welcome to you, I.M. Pei. Why don't we begin with some of your recent words? And if I may, I'd like to quote them. You said, and I'm quoting, "The talk about modernism versus postmodernism is all unimportant. It's a side issue. An individual building, the style in which it is going to be designed and built is not that important. The important thing really is the community. How does it affect life?" And then you go on to say, "To capture the spirit is more important than to satisfy the function. We tend to put too much emphasis on function, on how a building works, rather than how does it affect." Is that an accurate description of your design philosophy?
I think so. I think it's clear that if you look through history, you'll find that the Greeks have their agoras, and the Romans have their forum, and all civilized people have great squares and piazzas. This is where the life is. That's a theater of life in which architecture has to perform its function. I think it's that setting for life that is the great challenge for architects and architecture.
Shall we join that issue of postmodernism now?
I think this is a subject.
Is it ever an issue for you?
Not really. I know a year ago, I think this was a very hot issue among American architects. But tell you the truth, when I travel around the world talking to architectural schools in different parts of the world, it was not an issue at all. I think it's a peculiarly American phenomenon that we talk about postmodernism when we're really in the midst of still very much a continuous development of architecture as we know it, which is modern architecture.
How would you describe this period?
I think modernist architecture, which started actually way back in only 50 years ago, is still very much alive here today. And I don't think it's that easy to say that it's finished. And for that reason, why I do agree with some of the premises set forth by many architects, and many of them are young architects, perhaps here.
What are those premises?
I think premises that the modern architecture has largely run out of steam, and that we better look back and for other sources of inspiration in order to be more, hear something? Relevant and be more applicable to future. I don't happen to believe that. I believe in that. I think that we're very much alive. We're in the middle of a very vigorous period in architectural development. I think the continuity is there. I think there are other issues that are far more important than stylistic ones.
And what are those issues of contemporary concern?
I think you mentioned earlier, I forgot when I said that, but I think it's all right. Basically, I don't regret that. I think it's fine. Life is the issue. We're talking about architecture. We're talking about whether this style or that style is better. We're talking about looking back into history for inspiration. All these things are fine, but are we really solving the most serious problem of all? If you look at our cities today, look at all around you, New York and Philadelphia, for that matter, Paris and London. What have we got? We are not really building a civilized society. Our cities are looking terrible, and they're looking worse and worse. Individual buildings may be interesting, one maybe more so than the other, but we're not really building a civilized setting for life.
And when did we last do that?
Let's see. A long time ago. A long time ago. I think 18th century, 19th century France. You've heard of Napoleon III, for instance, the Baron Haussmann. They try something. It's a very authoritarian way of getting things done, but at least they have something that we can today look back with pleasure.
How about England?
I think the Georgian period, also in England, is a period that interests me greatly. I think then architects have developed a consensus. The Georgian vernacular was accepted. And out of that, together with classical revival under Christopher Wren and Inigo Jones, I think that was a great period, from 1960 to almost 1900.
1860.
Almost. No, I think it lasted until Victorian times. I think that long period, which we broadly call Georgian, is very, very exciting period in civic architecture.
Well, what are we to do given that appraisal? The last time we tried to level American cities, we were faced with a disaster of 1950s urban renewal. What are we to do to improve not only the look, but the life in American cities?
I think architects will have to begin to look at the larger picture. I think that's very necessary to look at and not at the individual building, because that building has to relate to other buildings, and other buildings have to relate to streets, and streets to squares and the like. I think if we begin to look at the larger context, which is not the individual building itself, but how it fits into the setting, if we begin to look at it that way, I think we can begin to develop a civic architecture which we lack today. I remember something which I think is rather interesting to point out. The other day I was called attention to the fact that Brunelleschi, I think in Florence, designed a building called the Foundling Hospital. Now many of you are architectural historians, so you probably remember the date. 15th century, let's call it that. It was close enough. About 89 years later, another architect, I think his name was Michelozzo, designed a building across the square from his Foundling Hospital, almost identical. Now that's civilized. That is being very civilized.
I thought that was sort of self-effacing, too.
Well, there's a larger problem. And Michelozzo was a very fine architect. And can you imagine that I would do a building just like Philip Johnson across the street?
Or vice versa. Well, then maybe part of the problem is the whole nature of architectural education.
Maybe. That's,
and it's something that is an area of continuing concern of yours. Are younger architects being trained to think in those terms?
I know that I wasn't when I was in school, but that was a long while back. I hope you are being trained and being educated that way, because that's the hope of the future. And architecture is really the mirror of life itself. And I think that unless we do that, we begin to look at what is important in life, and then what we can agree on. It's a cultural consensus that is lacking today. I think we should have that. And once we have that, the architects, I think, will begin to become less frenetic in search of something new, but rather in search of something that is good and relate well to the larger environment.
Do you know any architecture school where that is taking place currently? I know you're deeply involved with the school which you attended, MIT. Does that happen there or any other place?
No, it doesn't. It's not happening there, unfortunately. I try my best, but I think I'm a bit out of date when I speak to them that way. They don't think that this is their, the young architects and the teachers of the school feel that their concerns are very different from mine. And I like to continue to talk about it that way because I don't think that they're right. I think they're wrong. I think this is a larger concern which I think architects, if not today, soon will have to face.
Well, you've designed everything from complex that transform entire cities to small isolated museums. By now there are more than 50 projects that your firm has designed, and many of them have been for the celebration of the arts. I'd like to recount some of them. The Everson Museum of Art at Syracuse in 1968, the Mellon Art Center at Choate School in 1972, the Herbert F. Johnson Museum of Art at Cornell in 1973, the East Building of the National Gallery in 1978, and upcoming is the Indiana University Art Museum, and the addition to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. I guess they started out with a plan to install climate control, and by the time they were through talking to you, they ended up with a new wing. Is there any other, are there any other museums that we don't know about yet?
Yes, I think the latest one is probably the most interesting. We're doing a small museum, not a very big one, for MIT. It's called the Arts and Media Museum. That's something new. I think this is, I find it extremely exciting. And I don't think tonight is the time to talk about it.
Perhaps you could describe it briefly, since you obviously see it as some breakthrough in your museum design.
Well, not so much a breakthrough, but it's a different kind of challenge. There's no longer a place where you hang paintings or install sculpture. There's some of that, but that's not the important thing. It's a laboratory for art, and I think that's the exciting thing. And the MIT is a very, very renowned school of science and engineering, and its resources in the area of electronics, in computer, photography, film, sound is incredible. I mean, the resources are very rich, one of the richest in the world. What MIT is doing in this tiny little museum is what Pompidou Center tried to do in an enormous establishment. But they don't have the intellectual and resources that MIT has. And for that reason, I think that it really, am I being chauvinistic? I don't know.
Well, I assume you meant an educational system
really
as
is,
a
and I
support
think,
system.
So the building is not really important. The building, I hope, will be architecturally all right, but I think the important thing is that the activity that will take place in the building will have a great deal of resonance. I think it will do wonderful things there.
The point that I was obviously making in retelling that long list of your museum involvement is that probably more than any other contemporary architect, you've been involved with museum design. I wonder if you could tell us what, if any of your original thoughts have recurred, have been confirmed, have been altered during the course of the design of all these museums.
Well, I think, first of all, I think art has to look well in a museum. I think that's a must. If it doesn't look well in it, then I think something is wrong with the design. Secondly, I think that it should be a pleasant place to visit. I think the enjoyment, I think this is, looking at art, you can't really look at art in a concentrated way for too long a period of time.
What's the level of museum fatigue? When does it set in?
Well, Carter Brown, who's the director of National Gallery, has always said that he thinks that 20,000 square feet is the maximum. And that's as large a museum as you should build, or a person should visit at one time. Can
you translate that into time for us?
Well, time is hard to do. Someone may spend a day walking around 20,000 square feet, and another person may just rush through it in 5 minutes. But it's not so much the museum fatigue part. You don't really have to worry about that when you have only 20,000 square feet. But it's the intensity that the works of art has on the individual, on the viewer, is such that you really cannot take too much of it. The diet, the art is simply too rich. And I think this is the important thing. And that's why I think a museum should be also a nice, pleasant place to be in. Because a good part of the time you want to come out for air. and you want that place to do that for you so that you can continue on and look at more and more art. I think that's very important.
Obviously, museums and their publics have changed, and I assume the designs as well. Are you designing a new kind of museum for a new museum-going constituency in this last, I guess, fifth of this decade? You deal with different numbers, a different population?
Yes, I suppose so. When I was a student, that was a long while back, I used to go to museums to cram for exam. Why? Because it's so quiet there. You know, nobody's there. And it's a nice place to be. But today, it's just the opposite. I mean, all you have to do is to go to a Metropolitan Museum on a Sunday. It's impossible to get up those steps. Has changed.
Well, how do you plan now, for example, for circulation, for crowd control, for so much space that is given to bookstores, to food facilities, all the support systems that that the museum itself requires to sustain itself, at least from an economic point of view?
Oh, I don't agree with that. I happen to think that that's not the right direction for the museum to grow. I think that if I were contributing to the museum, which I do, I hate to see that money go to gift shops. I don't like that at all. So I think they need some of that, but to put too much emphasis on food service, on selling reproductions and so on, is not my idea of what a museum should be.
Why don't we talk about what your idea of a museum should be and your most, I guess, publicly acclaimed demonstration of that. And I'm referring to the building that is now just about 2 years old, the East Building of the National Gallery in Washington. To begin with, downtown Washington is itself something of a monument. There's no other place in the United States that can match it, either in its scope or in its history. However, it also has a penchant for monotony. That was, at least until the opening of the East Building, on that same site. The gallery itself was founded, for those of you who may not recall, in 1937. The time it was founded, both the gallery itself and its adjoining trapezoidal plot was put aside for future use. Is that accurate? Mm-hmm. The planning of Mr. Mellon, the founding Mr. Mellon. Given that particular space, its location and its shape, obviously the site posed, a number of challenges to you. Can you tell us how you went about choosing to solve that problem and how you derived, what was the source of the inspiration for that shape building?
You have to look at the site in relationship to the other buildings that are already on the mall. And the most immediate neighbor that we have is the West Building itself. Now, all these buildings are neoclassic in architectural style, and they have a very strong axis, whether it's east-west or north-south. Usually you have axis in both directions. And I happen to believe that when you do a building, particularly in a place as important as the Great Mall, you want to become part of a larger family of buildings. And since the larger family happen to have a neoclassic face, it doesn't mean that our building need also have to have the same. Of course, we can't do that. But we'll have to take note of that fact, that these are neoclassic buildings. They're very strong symmetrical axes, and those axes will have to be responded to. Now, our site is an asymmetrical site. This is where I need slides, and I don't have it, so you have to try to follow my line of reasoning without the help of slides. The site is asymmetrical, and we need to develop an axis from the old building, which is the West Building, to link to ours. And that is the one thing that is the most difficult thing to solve. We just simply could not find a response to a very powerful east-west axis pointing at us from the old building. And we finally solved that problem really rather accidentally, I suppose, when I happened to try it out, and I drew a line connecting 2 points in this truncated sort of asymmetrical triangle. And out of that, we were able to develop an isosceles triangle. You know what that is, which is with equal sides on two sides, and then a right angle. And that isosceles triangle turned out to be just the device we needed to develop that east-west axis. So from that point on, everything followed that angle, or that triangle. And that triangle became the leitmotif for the design of the entire building.
Can you tell us something about those soaring spaces, the monumentality of the building, the balconies and the bridges that often lead to mysterious destinations? How did you decide to build a museums within the museum?
I think I mentioned earlier that I thought a museum should be a fun place to be, a place that is a pleasant place for people to be, so that you can linger and you can come back and look at some more art and then come out and refresh yourself and go on and on. I think that's the reason why the building is designed that way. You see, the museum in Washington has a peculiar, I think it's different from museums anywhere else. Imagine that across the mall from us, we have the Air and Space Museum. You know, it's a very exciting place. I don't know whether you've been there or not. I tell you, I recommend it.
The most widely visited museum in the entire country. It's the most exciting, and not only they have these modules that came back from the moon, they have a movie that is one of the greatest movies I've ever seen, and things of that kind. Now here we are. We have perhaps Picasso, perhaps de Kooning. How can we compete with that? Well, that was my first concern. You know, in a way, you want people to come here, and their draw is so strong, a powerful draw. So the museum in Washington, therefore, has a very special challenge posed to us. And we tried it by architectural means. We tried to make the place inside an exciting place to be. And I think that the bridges you mentioned, the daylight that we brought in, all calculated to make the place exciting, so that families who come, particularly children, would say, let's linger, let's stay a little while longer. And that's what we tried to do. You mentioned earlier you did not give too much approval to large amounts of space given either to gift shops or to food services. But as I recall, there is a very extensive restaurant facility that bridges the two buildings. What were the constraints placed upon you when you took that commission?
Well, we had to eliminate an existing restaurant in the old building, number one. So having eliminated the restaurant, we have to put something back. So we are concentrating in one place, shall we say, a larger restaurant than the original restaurant, so as to serve both the east and the west building. So the number of seats that we finally decided to put in there was based on really a real need. Now, Washington, unlike New York, unlike many other cities, they just don't have a place to go to eat. And the way we planned this restaurant in terms of the number of seats, shall we say, it's not only to serve the museum, the two museums, but also to serve many other public places on the mall. So it's larger than I like, but it's always full. So I would have liked to devote that to more exhibit space, but in this case, I'm afraid that it's needed.
You raise a question that I guess for a building that is nearly 2 years old is old enough and praised enough, and I guess it was bound to happen for a reaction to set in. You said you would like to have devoted more space to exhibition space. How do you feel about the recent criticism, especially about the amount of exhibition space that is available?
Yes, I feel some responsibility for that. Not that we don't...
What is the amount of space? I've heard so many figures, and I've heard so many references. So one question is, what is the amount of exhibition space? And two, is the public yet aware of the total amount of exhibition space there?
I don't think they're aware of the total, simply because there are so many galleries there that very few of them really have a chance to see all of them at one time.
Are all of the galleries yet open?
One or two may be closed at certain times for installation, because let's remember this. The East Building cannot stand alone as a museum. It's designed to complement the West Building, the original National Gallery. Now, the original National Gallery is really a veritable storehouse for masterpieces. It really is one of the greatest collection, I think, small collection compared with Metropolitan, but one of the greatest in the world. They have that. What they lack is a place where they can have new shows coming from other parts of the world. Large and small, all happening at the same time. So the East Building, we have to look at it in that context.
It also serves another function, isn't that correct?
Which is?
A study center.
Oh, yes, thank you, Barbara. I forgot. Yes. You know, the East Building is larger than the original building. The original building is about 475,000 square feet. The new building, the East Building, is 600,000 square feet. So therefore, now what is in 600,000 square feet? The museum is only 1/3 in area, not in volume, in area. Another third goes to the study center. It's a place for research, for scholars to come to write, for administrators of the National Gallery to do their program, to send exhibits and works of art all over the country and all over the world. The other third is for really to support not only the new building, but also the old. The support meaning servicing, loading and unloading, storage, temporary storage, permanent storage, that sort of thing. It's like an iceberg. What's below ground is much larger than what you see above ground.
Is it 30% of the building?
30% of that goes to, of course, food services included in it. The bookshops, the restaurants, the storage, some parking, permanent storage, temporary storage, you name it, trucking, loading and unloading, carpenter shop, photographic laboratories, etc., etc. Lots of that. So we only have 1/3 of this total budget devoted to quote-unquote display space as museums.
Well, there is another criticism, and I hope you will comment on this one as well, and that is that the desire to create monumental space was so strong that it overwhelmed the gallery areas, which some critics feel were leftover spaces, that it was really used as a public forum in many ways to serve official Washington, which indeed it has become in some small measure. Would you comment on that, please?
I think that was in the program, as a matter of fact, because the National Gallery is not only a place to display art, to store art, but it's also a very important center for social and artistic life in Washington. When the president wants to greet someone from another country, like Deng Xiaoping, for instance, or maybe the Minister of Culture from France, usually the National Gallery is chosen as a site for entertainment, for reception. We were told that the West Building performed much of that kind of function already. So the East Building necessarily will have to do more. And we have that as part of the program. Now, the criticism that we have devoted too much space and too monumental space that are probably difficult for art to live in it is something that I would have to defend. I think the Garden Court is a very large space. There's no question about it. It has to be large not because we wanted it to be monumental, but rather we felt there's a need to accommodate very large number of people at one time, as indeed we do. If you go there Easter time, when the schools are out, that hall, that Garden Court is just jam-packed with people. And if you don't have that space, it will become insufferable spatially. So you need it. Now, that space is not intended for art, although we do have the Calder there, and we do have Miro tapestry, and a Tony Carroll sculpture, and a few things like that, but they were not really, that place is not really intended for
So it was meant
exhibiting.
as a public,
it's meant
like
as
your
a
indoor
public,
piazza.
That's right, it's an orientation space. It's a space for that kind of miscellaneous and very important activities. But then when you go away or into these galleries, and there are many, many galleries, you know, tucked away, different scale for different types of exhibits. When you're in there, art is completely in scale with the spaces that they're designed for.
Well, together with Carter Brown, you traveled throughout the world looking at other museums. Was there any that was a particular source of inspiration to you in the design of the East Building?
Yes, we, both of us came away with the feeling that this museum should really not be a large museum, but should be broken down into a series of small museums, sort of loosely joined together under one roof. And I think this is where the Garden Court performs that function of joining these small museums together. And we really have 3 museums in this East Building.
Were there any museums that particularly inspired you?
Yes, and we both came to that conclusion, actually, that you see, the museum that really excited us the most, that we liked the best, is the Pezzoli Museum in Milan. It's a 3-story museum connected by a very elegant stair. Very elegant stair. And altogether, it's exactly like one of our house museums. And it's perfect. It's as much as one can take if we're really serious about art. And we have 3 such museums in this building, which are like the Pezzoli. So we learned something from that. Whereas all the other big museums, particularly the British Museum and the Louvre, all seemed wrong to us. And we just didn't want that to. And I think the scale of this museum, in spite of the Garden Court, I think is a very intimate scale, has a very intimate scale.
It seems to me that the East Building was an architect's dream come true. A great site and a very great client. The entire cost of what has been estimated at $94.4 million, and by way of contrast, the Hirshhorn Museum cost $16 million, was paid for by a private benefactor, Mr. Mellon. Is that correct?
Correct.
That is the first thing. So the question that I have, because when you referred to the program, I wondered if there were restrictions or definitions or limitations that were placed upon you because of the very nature of that assignment. Did the trustees, did the benefactor, did the fact that the National Gallery is a national gallery, and I guess we tend to forget that I think all save 6 employees are civil servants. Were there any restrictions in terms of design, materials, that were placed upon you?
Yes, but not too many, fortunately, but that very definitely.
Can you tell us what some of them
were?
One
is that this building has to last forever. We have to build it out of marble, just like the West Building.
And you did that?
We did that. Very expensive.
How did you arrange to do that? How did
Asking
you match?
for more money.
How did you? How did you match the marble?
We have to go back to Tennessee to open up the old quarries.
The same ones from the original building?
Same ones, yes. And not only that, we even found the man who was responsible for the assemblage of marble work for the West Building, Mr. Rice. Malcolm Rice was still alive then. He is now about 80-some years old. And we took him out of retirement and put him in charge. And he was at the quarries, not quarry, because many quarries all over Knoxville, Tennessee, and supervising the selection and the matching of the marble. It was a very big effort. Now, we haven't done too well.
You don't like the match?
Well, we could have done better. But I tell you, it's a remarkable feat of Mr. Rice that he did as well as he did. Because, you see, Mr. Pope, John Russell Pope is the one that designed the original West Building, had 4 shades of marble to choose from. They're all Tennessee pink, but there are 4 shades, ranging from very, very light color white, almost off-white, to a very dark brown. We only have 2 shades to play with. And therefore, the matching is much more difficult in our case, much more difficult for Mr. Rice to do a job here than he did, let's say, 35, 40 years ago.
You mentioned that the space, what you have now called the orientation space, you referred to the Dubuffet, to the Miro, and to the Calder, I guess the Rosati,
yes.
the Tony Caro. That is in that space.
And then Henry Moore, if you look out of the window, out of the main door, and then you see Dubuffet in the fountain or in the pool.
Well, how does that work relate to the architectural design of the museum, and how were those works selected? Were they specially commissioned? And who did commission them?
There existed, although I think it probably still exists today, an accession committee for selection of works of art. And that committee expanded its function to include commissioning. So at the very beginning, I think soon after the building was accepted, in principle, the design was accepted, I believe it was I who called attention to this committee that there may be need for commissioning works of art of certain scale in order to match the scale of the building. And Carter Brown and I were then asked by the committee to make recommendations. So that's how the whole thing started. So before the building was gelled in design, unfortunately, we should have started a lot sooner than that. We had a model made and put in the West Building. And then we invited artists, and many of them accepted our commissions, finally did works for us, to come and look at the model, the maquette. And then it's that kind of give and take that took place between the artists and ourselves that finally resulted in the choice of pieces, in the scale of the piece, and the positioning of the piece. And that relationship between artist and architect is not as ideal as in the Renaissance times, when it's all combined usually in one man, but it's as close as we're able to get to, considering the distance between points. For instance, Henry Moore works out of London, and we work out of New York. And we can only meet so many times before we can agree on what the piece should be. So it's not a perfect collaboration, but it's a pretty good one.
You've worked a great deal with Henry Moore, in fact, so much so that a Moore sculpture in front of some Pei buildings might even become a trademark, yes, so to speak. I'm thinking of the Henry Moore, yes, in front of your work in Columbus, Indiana, in front of the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., and now the recently dedicated Dallas Courthouse, City Hall, excuse me, the Dallas City Hall has a Henry Moore as well. How does your relationship work, and why has Henry Moore become such a recurring theme?
First of all, we have to think of scale. Contemporary buildings has very big scale that are no longer possible for a sculptor of Rodin's tradition to satisfy us. Let's take the Burghers of Calais. You can't make it 3 or 4 times the size of what it is, because it begins to look grotesque, particularly if it has a human form in it. It's very difficult. Look at even David of Michelangelo's, to me, look almost grotesque in the Piazza del Signoria in Florence, to me, almost grotesque. So I think that it cries for a new way to see. And I think what Moore has, and I think Picasso also has, because we're responsible for the Picasso here in the NYU. You probably know the one, the head of Sylvette. You see, what makes it possible for works of these artists to enlarge into very large size is because of the abstraction. It's not the human figure anymore, although it might have been inspired by the human figure or by the skull of an elephant, like in Henry Moore's case. But by the time it's finished, you no longer associate with a human figure. Consequently, that abstraction itself enables it to become a very large piece. And that's why 1958, when I first saw the Sylvette in Paris, I saw a tiny little photograph of a maquette, this big. And right then and there, I said, finally an artist was able to do something that can become very large in scale. Because it's abstract. I wouldn't enlarge a Maillot or Rodin. I just wouldn't consider it. I would not consider doing it. You see, that's the reason. Now, so Moore has that, because his works are quite abstract, and therefore they can be expanded in size and scale to match the buildings and the space. Number 2, his forms.
Who determines that expansion in scale, you or the artist?
Together. even with Picasso, we had to consult him. You know, this piece, do you know this piece at NYU housing down? The way we did it is this. We had to send Picasso a maquette of the Three Towers. And we gave him the scale. And a sculptor friend of his took it to Vallauris, and he looked at it, and he came back and said, I think my piece should be this big. And that, believe it or not, turned out to be within 10% of what we as architects thought it should be. So it was a very happy...
And whose determination prevailed?
Yes. You have
that
to
isn't often the case.
But it's only 5. I think we wanted it 40 feet high, and he wanted it 32 feet high, and I think 32 to 35, I think around that. So it's about 10% difference, and we chose his dimensions. Question
about the art and commissioned for the National Gallery. You said most every artist accepted your commission. Were there any who rejected it?
No. One did not. I think Jean Dubuffet accepted the commission with reservation. And after he completed the piece, the reservation was on the other side, was on the part of the accession committee. So eventually, that piece was not commissioned, although the maquette was exhibited on the pool in the National Gallery.
At the time of the opening.
Mm-hmm. That piece was intended to be where Henry Moore is now, at the front door of the East Building. I actually would have preferred that over the Henry Moore. I think that piece would have been...
It was invitational. You might describe what it was.
Yes, it's a group of figures in red, white, and blue, his colors. And it's very gay. I mean, some people call it sinister. I think it's very gay. And he called it the Welcome Parade, which is a very nice thing, you know, when you come into the building. It's sort of like in a circus, you know, come one, come all kind of a thing. I liked it, and I really fought for it, but I lost. I lost because the committee felt that Washington is still a very conservative place, and what will the congressmen and the senators say? I remember that.
Other than Philip Johnson, I know of no other architect as deeply involved with the visual arts and artists as you are. I wonder if you'd take a moment and comment on a subject of recurring interest, and that is the state of the collaboration between artists and architects, and what you see as a future direction for that collaboration.
I think that the Renaissance times are gone, when in one man one can combine both the artist and the architect. Complexity of modern life, technological advances alone would inhibit this kind of Renaissance man. I don't think we will ever see that again. So therefore, I think it's incumbent upon us, artists and architects, to begin to understand each other. And we have not perfected that. We're far, far away, a long way from it. I think the artists feel very much left out. They feel that they have gone way beyond the architects, and they're right. I felt uneasy about the commissioning method at the National Gallery. I think we've tried to do a little better than before, but we haven't really reached the ideal. We could do better. We're trying to do better now. We have this Arts and Media building in MIT. It's a very exciting one. Before we even have an idea of a design, we have decided to involve 6 artists. And 4 have already come in to see us at the very beginning. And they charge, not only to us, but to the artist as well, that his work is not an individual work of art standing in space or hung on a wall. It's part of the building, part of the environment.
A permanent part of the environment?
Permanent part of the environment. It's a very exciting thing. At this moment, I'm very optimistic that something is going to come out of this. For instance, Ken Nolan came in one day. He said, I don't think this is going to work. Before he even heard anything, he said, I don't think this is going to work. And then I said, well, listen. I said, well, we'll show you what we have in mind, and so on. And Catherine Helbrick, who's the director for the visual arts program, also encouraged this dialogue between the architect and the artist. And before he left, he was so excited because he said, my gosh, he said, you mean to say that You have this marvelous 4x4 grid, 4 feet by 4 feet grid, and it's metal. It has a silvery color. He said, that's perfect. I said, now I think we can do something. That before he left, ideas have already come out between us that we have joints between those grids. And the width of the joints have not been designed yet. But when he expressed interest in putting color in those joints, I knew what he was talking about. And from that point on, our joints are becoming wider, and we are now waiting for him to respond. So this is going to be part of the building now. The building, you may find color lines running through this thing, which at times you don't see, and other times you see, because joints have a depth in it. Now, this is going to be very exciting. The building is going to change as a result of that. And yet, the integrity of the building has not been damaged. At least, otherwise, I wouldn't have permitted it. Now, another example, Dan Flavin came in, and his work, he plays with fluorescent tubes, different colors. And we thought of different ideas, and finally we said, well, now our ceiling is a grid. It's a 4x4 grid, a unistrut grid. And they all have electricity running through them. Why don't you do something in that grid? He said, yes, that's wonderful. So I'm sure he's going to come up with ideas, maybe different color tubes, going to every which way. It's all right, as long as it follows certain specifications, such as we have to have so much light, and the light has to be fairly uniformly distributed. It cannot be black, dark in one corner, and very bright in the other corner. And those ground rules were accepted by him completely. So we haven't seen any results of his proposal, but I'm sure that he's going to come back with one. So we started not with too much optimism on my part or on their part, but already out of these two artists, they left with a very exciting feeling that something could be done.
In the past more than 25 years that I.M. Partners has existed, as I mentioned earlier, your firm has designed more than 50 projects, and I suspect it's more than 35 of them have won awards. In fact, the firm may be the very best fraternity of architects functioning in the United States today. I know that it's often been said that that is the case. I know that this is a pleasing reference to you, but is it an accurate one? How does the firm function? There are 200 employees, 135 or 40 architects. How does that all work? Who designs what and under what circumstances?
It wouldn't have worked 10 years ago, but it can work today. Let me explain. First of all, I'm very proud of the fact that we have such talented people in the organization. I really am more proud of that than even of the buildings, because without that, you don't have good buildings. The reason we're able to grow to this size is because we have the right people to staff it. And these people started with us. We all started together, many of us. In fact, I think the average length of association with the firm among the senior people, by senior people I mean those from senior associates up to
Is this during the Zeckendorf era that they started?
We started together, yes. We were all in the architectural department of Webb and Knapp, and that's where we started. And the average tenure, mind you, the average length of service is more than 20 years. So our partners have been together, 6 of us, been together for 25 years and some 30 years. So you see, we think very much alike. We can talk and design shorthand. And even though we may do it separately and make decisions separately, when it comes out, it's never in conflict. And I think when you reach that point, you can then enter into, say, an expansion to a size such as the one you mentioned now, without fear that you're going to lose quality. But I think it's a very dangerous thing. I think there's a limit to it, and I think that we are already too big. But we cannot afford not to be that big. I'll tell you why. There's another reason that inhibits us from being small. If you want to keep these people who have been with you for 20-some years, and when they first joined me, let's say I started at Webb and Knapp in 1948. I was alone. I was alone for 2 years before we started to expand. Imagine these people. When they came in, they were just freshly graduated out of universities. Today, they're in their 40s and 50s. And most of them are in their 50s today. They want responsibility. They're ready for it. And in order to give them responsibility, you have to let them take charge. If you want to let them take charge, you have enough of them that want to take charge. Before you know, you have a fairly large organization. You see, so I think
you train the younger persons who want to take charge.
Yes, now that's the problem. Now that's a
that is a problem.
That's a problem.
In everything.
Yes, I'm very much interested in that problem because I'm already looking to 20 years from now, when I'm no longer here. 20 years from now, I like this firm to remain a force. There are many architectural firms that have been very good for a period of time and then disappear from the scene. I think that's unfortunate. I think that's the reason why I have a very special interest in the young. The large projects, I begin to delegate more and more. But I continue to take small projects. A $10 million project today is a small project for us. It's projects of that size. And these projects you can delegate to a young man who's in their 30s, and he can run with it. Of course, I have to be there. And therefore, I take on a new role now in the firm. I hope to be able to begin to help train the next generation who will come along. And when this generation, my generation, start to be less active. So
I can't envision that possibility in your case. However, I think we should take perhaps a specific example of how the firm does run. And I think it would be an example that is of considerable interest to all of us, not only here, but perhaps throughout the country. After 10 years and 2 sites and 2 designs, the largest and most important new building undertaken in New York in decades will be built. What I'm referring to, of course, is the New York Exposition and Convention Center. The building is to cost, we hope, $375 million, will be located between 11th and 12th Avenues and 33rd and 39th Streets in Manhattan. It's also the largest exposition center under one roof in the United States, over 750,000 square feet, in an 18-acre building on a 22-acre site. I am citing all of these statistics to give you an idea of the scale, the monumentality of the project, and your attempts to humanize it, I guess. Eventually, the building will accommodate a population of up to 80,000 people. More than 15,000 people will be added to the payroll in the city. Why do you take on a behemoth such as that? And when you take it on, perhaps you might describe to us who is responsible for both the design, the conception, and the implementation of a project that is obviously so large that it is beyond the capacity of any one person to undertake.
First, I would like to correct the construction cost that you just mentioned. The project cost is $375 million, but the construction cost is a very limited one. It's $203 million, still a lot of money. But it's a painful thing to keep that budget in these days of high inflation, but we're going to do it. We're going to do it, and I think that...
What is that differential for, from the 203 to 375 million?
Administrative costs, financing costs. You add them all together, fees, consultants, environmental impact studies, what name them. There's a whole list of consultants that long, and etc. So as far as we're concerned, we have a maximum limit, and that is $203 million. We have to do it within that sum. If we don't, we have to redesign again until we do. So the budget and time constraint of this project is very, very
And what is the time projected for the opening?
We hope to open this project in the spring of 1984. And if Mr. Kahn, Richard Kahn, who's the president of UDC, has his way, he would like to open it in 1983. If he does, I think many of us will be will have to take a rest somewhere.
Well, how do you fill somewhere? How do you fill the demands of a convention center and still come up with a building of human scale and of visual interest?
Not so sure one can do human scale. Let's to begin with. You've asked me a number of questions that long list of questions of yours. I don't know where to begin. To begin with, I think, how do we design such a building? This building, believe it or not, was conceived within a matter of a month, was refined and tested out that it would be workable in a matter of 2 or 3 months, and we are only 6 or 7 months down the way. Now, in the beginning, the very, very first day, this is how the project gets to be start on the right foot or wrong. The very first day when we were being interviewed, this must be the one of, I don't know how many interviews that we've gone through, but this turned out to be our last. And there was at that time, there were only 3 candidates left, and we were one of the 3. And Richard Kahn and 2 others came to our office and sat down and discussed the project. And I thought that was my chance to say what I really believed in it and to tell you how important that day turned out to be. I said this is the first time that New York City is considering building a public building. First time ever since I've been in New York. I don't consider Lincoln Center a public building because it's really private, more private than public. This is the building every citizen of New York City and New York State can claim the piece of mine. This belongs to me. So this is a very exciting thing. And yet, I've lived in New York for 20-some years, I told him, almost 30 years. And I've only been to the Coliseum twice. Which means the Coliseum, which is an exposition and convention center, means relatively little to me as a citizen of New York. I wouldn't want this to happen to this building. He said, well, what do you propose to do? I said, I only ask for one thing. I said, this is a very large building. It has 2 million square feet in it. If you give us 5%, say 100,000 square feet, and let us do what we wish with it, we'll turn it into really a public.
And is that the enchanted lantern that Governor Carey refers to, the Crystal Palace
Yes,
portion?
And that's what, if you saw the model in the Museum of Modern Art, which is now on exhibit, that model shows that 100,000 square feet. The other 1,900,000 square feet is not there.
Well, why don't you describe that Crystal Palace portion, the part that has lightly reflective glass and pewter-colored latticework that really, I assume, is intended to reflect the city literally and figuratively, and that is the center portion. Who conceived the design for that? In fact, you might, if I may, and forgive me for making the question as multiple, but I want you to touch on, many of the points that interest us. And I hope that you can describe in some little detail that solution that you and your partner, James Freed, have come up with. And I wonder if you would also differentiate your roles.
All right. To begin with, let's see how this project got conceived. At that time, when we first tackled the design, which is about, I would say, 6 months or so ago, we were in the process of trying to open the Kennedy Library. Those were the last 2 months. And the Kennedy Library has...
And that opened ahead of schedule.
Yes, I think so. The Kennedy family may not agree with that, but I think we did. It's, there you remember we have a pavilion, which is a glass pavilion. 70 feet by 70 feet by 110 feet. There's nothing in that pavilion. There's only a stone bench, which only recently was installed. But when we opened, we didn't even have that. And yet, it's almost complete. It's not scale. If you say it must have human scale, it doesn't. The dimensions are not human scale dimensions. Now, what makes that pavilion work? It works because it has daylight. And this is also the reason why the garden court in the National Gallery works, because it has daylight. When you bring daylight into a space, it begins to become alive. It changes with the moving clouds, you know, sunny days, summer, spring, winter. And you also look out and see the skyline on top of that. So that's an important lesson. And we learned that. And we say, now here we have an enormously large space. A bigger space New York will not will ever have, but at least will have for a long time. And in order, there's no way to make it a human scale. But you've got to bring daylight in. Got to bring daylight. So that's the beginning of the idea of the Crystal Palace. Then we can thought back at the great examples of the past. The Crystal Palace in London, outside London. The Grand Palais in Paris. These are all buildings that have that kind of mystery, you know, and all the excitement. So we decided then and there, we in this case is not only myself and Jim Freed, but many others as well, sitting down around the table, they say, it's got to be daylight. It's got to be a pile of crystals. Simple as that. Now, then we have to worry about energy, solving the energy problem. Because unless we can solve that problem, we haven't got a solution. And therefore, we have to engage the engineers to come in to test. And we found out that glass is not all bad. Certain times, if you know how to trap the heat, it can serve you as well. So therefore, on balance, we could defend it because we have to follow the energy code. And believe it or not, we fit in with the energy code. But it's a new way of looking at sun.
Whose concept was the Crystal Palace for the building?
I guess that for those of us who work on the Kennedy Library, I think we already had that at that time. It's the same thing. It's a piling up of, if you pile up that pavilion of the Kennedy Library, you have it. I think here again, as I said, that the office works so well together, and I'm very proud of that fact, that as soon as we say that, or let's say I said, maybe in this case I did say, because I was so involved with the Kennedy Library at that time, that we should use space frame, we should have a pile of crystals, and let's not worry about the human scale, let's make sure that we bring in the natural element into the space. From that point on, now this is the interesting, from that point on, our team started to take over and test it and test it and test it. Now the team consists of 2 partners. 2 out of our 6 partners are running this job. Jim Freed on design and Werner Wondermeyer on administration and management. 2 partners out of 6 involved in this job. And not to mention many other senior people that are in it. We're a very strong team in this case. Then I left it. This is the way I work. The larger the job, the sooner I leave it. Because from that point on, it's interminable. The number of meetings that Mr. Wondermeyer and Mr. Freed had to attend must be 3 or 4 a day. If I have to stay with the job all the way through, I would not be able to do anything else for the office. So therefore, when the concept was arrived at, and the concept seemed to be right, as long as the concept is not going to be changed, it moves, and frequently without me.
Does that reflect, in a sense, the change in architectural practice, that by the time one is really sure of how to use whatever tools one uses, they are very far removed from that? I mean, when was the last time you held a T-square? So you might just tell us how architectural practice has evolved and how little, I guess, in projects of that scale take place in what are former and conventional ways.
No, we don't draw anymore. I speak for myself. I certainly cannot speak for Michael Graves.
He's going to speak for himself in 2 weeks here.
I tell you, I don't draw anymore. I do draw occasionally, a diagram here and too, but really, if you're not able to draw in your mind, you're not able to tackle these problems. They're too complex. And you've got to train your mind to see space. And when you have 2 lines, you have a plane. When you have 3 lines, you have space. And you've got to see it. You've got to see it. It's only the most complex of space that you have to test it with other means. And those means are not drawings. Those means are not drawings. No, drawing is no longer as important as they were in the Beaux-Arts days, at least not to me.
I assume research and development is, and that's something that your firm gives a great deal of attention to. And there are some tangible results. One we did not discuss, and that is in terms of the National Gallery. As I recall, it is referred to, and I cannot manage an electric can opener, so please correct me, as a spirene gasket. And is that what permits those, the marble in the facade? Is that not an I.M. Pei and Partners development?
Yes,
and can you explain its use, and is there a future use for it that other firms have adapted? What is a spirene gasket anyway?
We all learn one from the other. I tell you, we only, the gasket has been used for some time to put between stones. The reason you have to use gasket is simple. That stones today, do you know the stones expand and contract? You may not know that, but
this
it does.
Is an audience of professionals,
oh,
by and large.
Excuse me.
They know far better than I do.
Well, I didn't know. I didn't know until I was told that it does expand and does contract. And I tell you, I didn't know. 10 years ago, I didn't know. And this is why joints started to bust and the caulking started to come out. And we were aware of that problem. Now, then we went back and looked at Pope's building, and it's good. I mean, there were no problems except downstairs on the ground where they have a moat wall. There they have problem. But in the building, they didn't have any problem. There are two reasons why they didn't have any problem, we learned. Number one is that the stone is very thick. So it absorbs the temperature and takes a long time for it to give out. You know, that minimized the cycle of change. That's one reason. Reason number two, it's simply that it's interesting that these old Beaux-Arts buildings have a reason why they are so. Those pilasters, those capitals, the frieze, those details are marvelous joints. The slip joints that permit the building to expand and contract. Now, a modern building doesn't have that. And that's our problem. You see, our buildings are flat surfaces, run for 200 or 300 feet. And if you don't have a solution for that expansion and contraction, you're going to have endless trouble all the way through. So it's that we decided to search into new methods and new technology and new materials. And the neoprene gasket was the one thing that permits us to solve the problem. Because every stone has a gasket, which means every stone has this much to move. And that's all you need. So it's not accumulated. When it's not accumulated, you don't have this tremendous stress. And the building today, what is it, at least 5 years old now, even though opened 2 years ago. We have no problem. And I think it works.
Is the lattice work frame that was used both at the John F. Kennedy Library Complex and will be the, I guess, support structure for the Crystal Palace portion of the convention center?
Exactly the same.
And was that developed by your firm for the library?
It's a firm that you can, it's a product that you can buy in the market.
In the convention center, you're planning 2 large exhibition halls in addition to the exposition and commercial uses of that hall. What do you plan to do with those spaces?
We have a great hall. Let's call it a great hall. I like to think of a better name, but for the time being,
pretty good.
Because it is going to be big. And that hall is a place for people to meet. And I doubt that we're going to use it much for exhibition. Although once the building leaves the architect's hands, you never know what's going to happen to it. But I'm sure they're going to put an airplane in it, and put all kinds of things in it. But it'll be used, but it's a people's place. This is where the people meet. And we have crisscrossing currents of escalators in that space, which will animate that space, which will make that space come alive. So that's space one. And its use, I'm not afraid the space can never be harmed by anyone because it has enough power of its own. I think it will stand, will be all right. The second space is the so-called Galleria that runs east-west to the Hudson River. And that you have to go up to the upper level and go over. And that is also under glass. Now that space is the activity space. And this is the space that we now have to find activities for.
That is separate from the complex of riverfront restaurants.
Yes, separate from. Then you come to the very end of it, then you have a complex of restaurants on the other end overlooking the Hudson River. But that space in between, the so-called Galleria space, is equivalent to 2 city blocks long. And at the moment, there are many, many ideas. Some of them are very exciting, but I don't know which one.
Tell us what some of them are?
I don't think so. Premature. I think what we'd like to do is to make this place a place that people would come. If they come from out of town, they don't have too much time. They should come to this place and say, what is the best of New York? What can we see in New York? And I like this place to do that, to show them what New York has. Not only its wares, not only what it sells, but also its wonderful activities, the art, the exhibition in the museums, the theaters. I think there should be audio-visual methods in store.
Is that going to be possible with all that daylight?
I think, oh yes. They will enter into booths, you see, just like in the National Gallery. Enter into little galleries and then go inside, and you may visit all the galleries of New York and Soho, let's say, just by turning on the knob and see what's in Leo Castelli's gallery, what is showing in Andre Emmerich, and then say, no, I want to see that. You know, that interests me. I think we ought to do this sort of thing. The best New York offers.
You said that
should go there and see it.
Airplanes will be exhibited there. Would you expect works of art or computer versions of works of art? And are you planning to commission any for that space as well?
No, I wouldn't dare to commission anything here. I think, Barley, you have to think up something for this great space for art. I hope that exciting art forms will come in and use this space. The laser, for instance, is one. I think that inflatables is another. I think there are a lot of new things that can come into this space that cannot take place at the Metropolitan. And I think it's people like yourself, you know, that should begin to give some thought to it. And the space is actually yours because it belongs to all of us, as much to you as to anybody else. So let's use it.
How will you keep these, you know, works of art from being overwhelmed, though? And that's obviously why you're talking about that scale of work. Do you see this assignment as really one of the high points of your more than 30 years of work in New York?
Yes, I would say the highest.
Why is this project so important to you?
Not because it's big, but because it's so public. It's more public than the National Gallery. It's more public than the Kennedy Library. And it belongs to so many people. There are so many clients. And it will have a life of its own long after we leave the scene. It's the first great public building, great in terms of size, public building for the city and perhaps state of New York. What more can I say?
It's a lot to say. How did the son of a banker economist ever become an architect?
Well, to begin with, he didn't want to be a banker economist.
But he wanted to be an engineer.
No, I don't think he really had. He just wanted me to go to England, that's all.
No, when you first came here, did you not study?
No, I came here to study engineering because I didn't know any better.
There are a lot of distinguished engineers in this audience. And some of your best friends are engineers.
Yes, but still, it's good for them. And good for me, too, that they are. But no, that would not be my dish. I'm glad of that. I wouldn't make a very good engineer, I know.
You've called yourself an American architect, absolutely. You arrived in the United States at nearly the age of 18, and until recently you had not visited China for almost 40 years. To what extent does your Chinese background shape your attitude toward life, since that is obviously a central factor of your architecture and your architecture?
I don't really think it has that much effect on my work. That's my belief, although I've been contradicted in that. Yes, on philosophy of life, yes, which is related to architecture, I guess. In that sense, it might have some indirect effect. Coming from a society, from a tradition that believes in very strongly in relationship between people, not only within the family, but within the society. I mean, the sort of one-to-one relationship is extremely important in that Chinese culture. I think trade gave me a sort of an advantage in this case because I like to think, concerned with buildings as it relates to people using the buildings. And I think that concern, is important and very important to our work and certainly in my work. So I think in that sense, maybe we have a little bit of, I have to give some recognition to that background of mine. But beyond that, all my educated life, one really doesn't become educated until very much later in life anyway. It's all here, and I'm a Western-trained person. I'm a Western man, and in that sense, I think my architecture is Western, and it's not Oriental.
Well, you're about to have the opportunity to be involved in what you've called a search for synthesis. You're designing a hotel in the Fragrant Hill suburbs of Peking. To begin with, Peking is a one-story city, and the entire inner city is a landmark. How do you design a new hotel without adopting your Western methods or without adopting the old palace style? What is your plan and your intention for that hotel that is, I guess, ground is about to be broken?
Yes, we're going to break ground next month, after 1 year, which is not bad. I would say this, it's a fascinating problem. The fact that I was born in China increases its interest, but I think that would have been a fascinating problem for any architect to face. If you go into a country, as I did, say a year ago, to look at this project, one realizes, and I realized certainly right away, that the Chinese architecture is absolutely at a dead end. Totally. There's no way for them to go. I'm not exaggerating. Anybody who knows it, the Chinese architects themselves would agree with me on that. And they couldn't go back to the old ways. The days of the temples and the palaces are not only economically out of reach, but ideologically unacceptable to them. And to go west, no, they wouldn't do well either, because they tried the Russian way and they hate those buildings. They really hate those buildings. And they're trying now to accept the West, to take the Western way. And I'm afraid in 5 or 10 years, they hate our buildings too. I mean it, they'll hate it. Why? Because unlike Japanese culture, the Chinese culture is very long and deep and very, very conservative because of that tradition. And Western culture is much less digestible in China than it is in Japan. So the fact that the Japanese architects today outdo us in many of the newest forms of new styles is not surprising to me. But I cannot imagine it happening in China. So the Chinese architects are really in a great dilemma. They really don't know which way to go.
Well,
so
what are you trying to do there?
Well, I don't know. I think I would like, in a small way, to pay a debt to a culture from which I came, to try to help them search for a new way. That sounds almost very pretentious as a claim, but I think one has to set that kind of a goal if you want to achieve this much, even. And I think really that's one thing that I think that we in our office are dedicated to search for. We're trying to find really a new Chinese architecture.
And what is the reaction of that office to that goal?
It's difficult, but it's fascinating. It's possible. You know, we're now beginning to think that we almost can do something here.
What does the hotel look like, if you can describe it briefly? I can't
describe it. You have to go there. You promised me.
I intend to. I do.
Well, first of all, let's say, what is architecture? Architecture really is to synthesize the best out of life, take the best out of life and best out of history. And whatever that is still valid, I don't care how old it is, use it. But what is not valid, abandon it. And there are many things, elements in Chinese architecture today are still very valid.
Are you retaining any of those elements in your design? For
Absolutely.
example?
we talked in the Western architecture circles about the importance between indoor and outdoor. Without that concept, there's no Chinese architecture. The indoor and outdoor is always one. A study for a scholar without a small garden in front of it is not a study. You have to talk of the two as one. A study for a scholar has garden. It's a garden is part of the study. So therefore, that's one. The relationship between indoor and outdoor, the role played by extremely small outdoor spaces, very small outdoors, and to maximize the effect of very small outdoor spaces is key to Chinese architecture. And this we use. We will have that. Number two, in order to do something that is called, let's say, that has, again, I want to use the word, has relevance, that other architects in China will find that they can say, yes, we can do something in that direction. That means that you have to use traditional materials and traditional methods of construction. If you go there and introduce precast, pre-stress, space frame, you've missed the boat totally. They can't do it. They will look at it and marvel. But that's all. But it will have no relevance and therefore no resonance. So I think the second thing that we're trying to do is that we're not inventing new materials. We're using their materials. We're using it the way they use it, except that the art is in how to use it. And I'd like to think that we have made some contribution in that direction. So the building, when it's finished, will not look, quote unquote, Chinese, and yet it's not Western either. So I think Chinese, more than Chinese architects, will be comfortable with these buildings. They may even like it. And if they
Is that your reaction now?
I don't know yet. We haven't, you see, they won't see it until 2 years from now when the building's finished.
But to those whom you presented the plan?
Yes, they understand, they understood, and they accepted the whole approach. I really was amazed that they find it really acceptable without glorifying, say, that China is now entering into modern life. I mean, obviously, this is what they want to see. They want to use the latest. They want to use steel frame. They want to use very fancy kind of air conditioning and so on. They want to do all those things. So we're giving them something which is not everything that they want, but nevertheless it's something that I think they can have, and they should have, and therefore they can develop. Therefore, that approach, therefore, can be replicated by architects all over the country in 101 ways. And I think that's the only way to begin a new vernacular in architecture. And this is how Renaissance started. That vernacular lasted 300 years. Georgian architecture, wonderful. I mean, really great. Go to London. What is it? What is London? Yeah. So there you are. This is how one begins. And I think that these tall buildings that all these great hotel chains want to build in Peking, 30 stories high, 20 stories high, designed by the best-known firm in the United States, are not going to succeed for that reason. They will be showplace, but it will not be good influence in a country like China.
Of all your buildings, the Hancock building has been the most controversial. Some have attacked it.
Ready.
Others have praised it. But there is hardly anyone who does not have a strong feeling about it.
Yes.
I guess the Hancock building is also the most famous of all architectural liability cases, based on a problem that involves a relatively new technique, and that is double-layered reflective glass. I wonder if you can tell us something about the realities of that problem. We've all heard so many stories. I wonder if you could tell us, here comes a multiple question again, if that building damaged the future for other curtain wall buildings, and how you think the future will deal with the John Hancock building.
I think the future is already here. It has recognized this to be a great office building. I'm very proud of it because it's designed by my partner, and I want to say
Henry Cobb.
Henry Cobb. So we're very proud of that building. The case, John Hancock case, is a very interesting case for architects. And I think I've learned a lot in that case. I've learned that architects are not very good at banding together, much to my dismay. I've learned that the American Institute of Architects is not as brave as I expected it to be. But all these are things of the past. And what I can tell you now with considerable pleasure is that the cause of the breakage of the building, of the glass of the building, is now known. Hasn't been tested yet in court, but we are almost certain it's going to be judged that way. But to begin with, that product is no longer on the market. You can't buy it anymore.
Well, perhaps you would tell us what the cause is, and also, with all the research and development and expertise of a firm like yours, how that was possible. What was the cause?
Well, we are very proud of our research department. We have probably one of the best, if not the best, curtain wall specialists in the country, in Mike Flynn. He's one of our associate partners. But in spite of that, we ran into this difficulty. And it's really quite understandable, because the testing of materials is never something an architect should try to do. And this is, the burden of proof should be on the manufacturers. They're the ones making money out of it. So therefore, I don't think for 1 minute the architectural firm should take on testing of materials simply because the industry failed. Now, the reason the industry failed in this instance is only human, is that the competitive instinct in glass companies are not any different from the automobile companies or any other companies. And they just wanted to rush the product to the market earlier than they should. And I think that that is part of the cause of it. And I would be, I'm sure that when the case comes to the court, this will be touched on. We specified, fortunately, not the thickness of the glass, the type of glass, and the tint in the glass, but we specified performance of the glass under certain conditions. And that saved us. And the glass simply did not perform under those conditions. So as architects, we're quite lucky. I shouldn't say lucky. I think Mike Flynn was very far-seeing when he wrote that specs for us. But really, honestly, I think that we all should take that case very seriously. The American Institute of Architects should really call us in and have us tell them a lot about this so that they can advise other architects in the future when they run into similar cases. And we've gone through it. We suffer through it. We now will benefit from it. And the fact that we have a good building now will continue to benefit us. So we're happy we're here still.
We're happy you're here still, too. Is there any...
Thank you.
Is there any specific building, a secret dream that you have for a specific building or a specific location for which you would like to create a design?
Oh, not for a while. We have enough. I think let's...
Well, when you just think about it,
yes,
since you're a long-range planner.
Oh, no. I should be content, to tell you the truth. I think now that we have an important building in New York, I am content. And the important thing now is to build that building and have it turn out the way I hope it will.
For what would you like most to be remembered?
I've been asked that question before, and I have answered that question several times, and still the same way. I will still answer it much the same way. I like to be known, really, as an architect of my time, this time, that I'm trying my best under that circumstance. And that's all, and nothing more.
Well, for giving us an evening that we will long remember, special thanks to you, I.M. Pei, and thank you all for coming to.